As young adults, we tend to associate climate change to large, catastrophic weather events. I know that's what I did, relating it to hurricanes, tropical storms, forest fires, or the commonly feared outcome of Arctic glaciers melting and the sea levels rising and the land disintegrating into the ocean. Well, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico this September opened my eyes to climate's effects beyond the environment. Puerto Rico lost basically all of its electricity and access to reliable food and water, and wasn't getting the help they needed to recover. The Casher Family Foundation conducted a poll showing that over 60% of Americans believed the federal government wasn't doing enough to assist them. Some say it was because the level of poverty and number of Hispanics in Puerto Rico was so high. Others say the disorganization of the local government was to blame. Nonetheless, these issues all relate to climate justice, a notion that the countries and communities who experience climate suffrage are the most reluctant and incapable of recovery. Climate justice is an increasingly pernicious issue for our society, affecting our world's environment and culture, and needs to be included in the development of any future climate defense plans. There are four main reasons why climate justice is necessary for climate change resolutions. The first is to establish responsibility for climate change and its impacts. We all know that industrialization was, of course, a contributor to the emission of greenhouse gases and has changed the condition of our atmosphere forever. But those most likely to suffer from these conditions are the ones least responsible for causing the problem. These countries had little to no influence for the development of industries and used them the least. Typically, the people of these countries do not own cars, have electricity, or take part in consumerism at all. These communities often already suffer from deprivation, exclusion, and inequality, creating a compound injustice. Capacity is the next aspect of climate justice that shows how climate suffrage is disproportionate and unjust. The people most affected in climate events lack the resources and capital to make the necessary adaptations. Hurricane Maria would be a perfect example to support the capacity argument. Puerto Rico pretty much needed everything. They needed necessities like food, water, medical aid, electricity, storage for supplies, and didn't get any of it urgently enough, causing the country to take out nearly $70 billion in debt. The country has yet been able to reconstruct their infrastructure, making the country more vulnerable to future disasters fueled by climate change. There is also the potential issue of development. How do these countries overcome such tragic climate conditions without contributing to the problem? In order for poor countries to be able to withstand the detrimental impacts of climate change, they must develop and gain money and other resources that they currently don't have. This would require energy and more coal-fired stations to be constructed, resulting in a circular process that ultimately produces more emissions. The challenge for low to middle income countries is to develop and overcome poverty while simultaneously taking action to climate change. In prospective climate solutions, it is crucial to eliminate current radiations, but also prevent future radiations. The fourth and final aspect to understand the relevance of climate justice is the pragmatic situations. Developed countries left an insufficient amount of space in the atmosphere for developing countries to emit carbon dioxide. The basic countries, Brazil, South America, India, and China, all argue that developed nations have exceeded their share of carbon space and are responsible for climate change, and therefore should pay for it. So how is our world implementing these issues within climate acts? According to the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, the global goal is to limit the increase of global temperatures to only 2 degrees Celsius above what they were prior to industries. This is where climate justice comes in. We must establish a global agreement and action that is equal for all countries. Climate justice combines the social issue of injustice and the environmental issue of climate change to create one unified idea. The UNFCCC acts as the primary source for directing the world towards this objective. This agreement introduces the idea that climate change should be resolved through the countries' common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, or CBDR-RC. This would obviously result in a difference between developed and developing countries within categories regarding historical responsibility, levels of economic development and capacities, and their vulnerabilities. Implementing equity into climate change plans can also be very difficult because countries, whether developed or developing, often view climate action as a constraint to their growth, rather than a pathway to sustainable, renewable energy loaded with new opportunities. These issues of climate injustice are becoming more and more evident in today's society. In just this year, 10 hurricanes and 6 tropical storms hit, devastating the livelihoods of numerous citizens. The development of the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Climate Accord are at the forefront of political discussions and activity. President Trump's rejection to join the agreement makes the topic of global climate regime more relevant than ever. The threat of climate change is more than an environmental threat. It's a human rights threat, going beyond the rise of surface temperatures. Climate change can disturb the global economy, the amount of food that is produced and distributed to citizens, and even one's location and way of life. Climate justice focuses on how these outcomes disproportionately affect the world, and specifically how these types of daily suffrage can stream into global suffrage. In order to pose a solution for climate change and climate injustice, in particular, it is imperative to frame the issue more universally and less personally. Although enacting a real change, one that will provide sufficient justice for the communities experiencing undeserving suffrage, will most likely require international action. It is our job as individuals to be aware of all aspects of climate change and promote solutions that benefit all communities and promote them with urgency.